hold on 1 second. Can you spot, here you go. You'll need to spotlight. Kevin, can you get out and get back in? You need to spotlight.
I can try. Hang on a second.
Because it's now got you at the edge.
Is that better? Okay, hi, I'm Kevin. I am the owner of Benchmark ITS. We have done a couple of trainings already today. We've gone over the orientation with the system. We've also talked about creating new classes in the system. And the session for this hour is in creating new students in the system. Creating new students in ADVANSYS is a workflow process that has been designed over our roughly 20 years of experience in working with adult education student data. And it's also guided by feedback that we get from our end users as well as our state teams. We've worked with your particular state team in order to help streamline this process to make the workflow fit your typical guidelines in terms of your intake forms, and also to make sure that we stay in alignment with Octave. That is one of our primary goals, is to make sure that this system provides all the proper information in the proper manner to complete the reports that are required for Octave. So we're going to start by logging into the system. I will tell you that this is a demonstration system first. There is nothing that you can do in this system that is going to hurt your live data. So if you wanted to create a new student and you wanted it to be Captain Marvel or Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck or Fighting Fish, whatever you wanted to do, you can create a new student in the system. You can place the student into classes. You can give the student assessments. You can do all the different things that we're going to show you today by creating a new student. So if you wanted to follow along and work through the process with me, that's fine. But I will encourage you not to try to use something unique for the username. So in the past, we have done these sessions, and we suggested you could put a Brad Pitt in the system, and then what we end up with is about 70 Brad Pitts, and that becomes difficult to manage when all the users have the same name. So if you're going to put a new user into the system, try to make it something unique. Use a pet's name. Maybe your last name first and your first name last, just something that would make it unique to you. If you have an intake form that hasn't been entered in the new system, or you're working with, you could enter an actual student. Again, it's not going to hurt anything. You can put whatever you want into the system. So the first thing I'm going to do is log in. Most of you at this point hopefully have a method to log in. When you log into the system, and you're going to be putting in practice data, please make sure that at the top it says demo mode. Demo mode means that this is the playground for you. This is the site that you can go to use for training, practice, to use for if you wanted just to see how an assessment entry might impact a student's record, this is the place to go and do that. This data is not live. It's not reported to the feds. It's not reported to the state. This is just for practice. Okay, the first page that you come to when you go to into the logged in is the dashboard. Dashboard gives you information students, and you can look into that information. We went over this in the orientation, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time there, but you can see the students who are in your program here already. But we are going to add a new student into the system. So to add a new student into the system, you go to, on the left-hand side. Actually, Jenny, I'm going to change the process here. If you want to see how to do this as we go through the process, let's start here. Go to the left-hand side, click on support, and choose downloads. Once you choose downloads, if you scroll down to the bottom section, it says other downloads, and type the word student into the search box, you will see a document that says, how do I create a new student? This is a step-by-step process that will show you many of the things that I'm going to go over today. And this will allow you, if you wanted to print this out or put it in another version, you can open this file. It's a Word doc, so you can open the file. You can make your own notes on it once you've downloaded it. But it looks something like this. Has the ADVANSYS logo at the top. How do I enter a new student? And then there's a step-by-step process. All of these steps that you see in this process here is exactly what I'm going to go over today. So all this information is here. You'll be able to see this information in this document. So if you wanted to have this open to work to use as a reference, you're welcome to do so. But I'm going to go through all of this process very quickly here today in the next hour. So if you want to go again one more time, you go to support and then downloads, put student in the other downloads function, and then look for a document that says, how do I create a new student? This is, again, it's a step-by-step process. A written version is going to show you all the things that we'll go over today. And I'll come back to that at the end and remind you again how to find that. So student management is where we're going to go first. And I'm going to go to look up new students and add new. Before I begin to enter a new student into the system, the first thing that I want to do is to make sure that the student is not already in the system, perhaps working with another provider. It's a little bit of a different concept how ADVANSYS works in relation to how you may have done things in the past. ADVANSYS is an enterprise level system. We are a state level system, a global essentially, so that a user who is in the system can be, a student who is in the system can be interacting with multiple programs at the same time. This system will automatically aggregate all the data for that student and provide it at a statewide level so that data that you enter today can be viewed by people with state administrative level permissions instantly. In the past, and many of the implementations we've done, not just in North Carolina, but in many of the implementations that we've done in the past, students were handled on a college by college or provider by provider basis. So you might have John Simmons working with one college, and then John Simmons is also working with another college, but those two records don't necessarily align. In ADVANSYS, there is one John Simmons, and each college interacts with John Simmons. So we're a student-centric system as opposed to a provider-centric system. I know that's a lot of verbiage, but the basic concept that I want you to make sure that you take from this is that the data is not in individual college silos. It is application-wide data for the student. So if a student is working with multiple programs, the assessment that the student is given in one program can be seen by the other program, and the other program can also add additional assessments to the record. So we do keep certain data isolated for each program for each student for each program, but the general idea is that the student drives this system as opposed to the provider. So the idea is we want to be able to aggregate data so that one student, one record is our primary goal, our primary mantra. That's our intent is to make it so that the one student has the one record. So that's a long explanation for we want you to search first. So before you enter a new student into the system, you can search for any combination of factors. You can search by social security number. You can search by identification number, by state ID. And I believe that, Jiminy, that may be the colleague ID. I'm not sure. That might be correct. Previous and maiden name, you can search by that. You can search by the ADVANSYS student ID, which you'll see is generated during the process. You can search by last name, first name, preferred name, which could be a nickname, or, some people just like to go by different names. And my daughter goes by Skippy. So if I put her name in as Skippy, I could find it here. You can search by date of birth. You can search by inmate number. Our best practice recommendation is all or part of the last name and the date of birth to search for a student. Typically, students they're less likely to make errors in the date of birth than they are in the spelling of a name. So I'm going to first search and I'm going to see if there's anybody with, choose this name. And I don't need to do that one because it's actually the whole file. Okay, I am logged in as a program administrator for my sample program in the system. So even though I find other students in the system, I can't see the full data record. Let's try. I know his name is James Smith, but he might go by Jamie. So I'm going to put JAM as the first name, and I'm going to go and look this up. And what comes up actually, typically you will either get one record or you get a multiple records. And because I'm the administrator for another program, I can see multiple records, but I can't see anything beyond the basic information for this student. I can't make any edits to this student. I can't make any changes to the student, but I can see the basic records that other programs have entered for the student to make sure that it's the right student that I want to work with. I see the date of birth. I see which colleges the student has been enrolled in, is currently enrolled in. This is not the right guy. There's Jamie. That's the one I was looking for. I know that's Nesmith. I go through the list. I find the right person, and then I can add that person to my program. But we're going to assume at this point that the student is not in any other programs. So I'm going to go back to look up students and add new. And when I want to enter a new student into the system, we actually make it difficult for you. The rationale is we want you to search first. So the search box is large. The click here to enter a new student in the system is small. And again, that is psychologically purposeful. So click here to enter a new student into the system. The first thing that populates is a student bio edit. This is the basic information for the student. It does not place him or her or into a program. It does not do anything but register this student within the state system and put their record in so that the student can be accessed by the program and can have a registration added, etc. So I'm going to put this student into the system. So now I've entered the first name, the middle name, the last name, and a preferred name. Okay. If you notice, the first name is in red, the last name is in red with an asterisk. That means that information is required. I'm not required to put in a middle name, nor am I required to put in a preferred name or a previous last name or a maiden name. I did so, however, in order to help me to search for this student in the future. Date of birth is a required field. If you notice when I put in date of birth, it tells me the current age of the student. ADVANSYS will continue to keep a record of that student's age so that when we are looking at the age populating tables, I believe table 1 and table 2 consider age, we will continue to update this based on the student's birth date. So you don't have to go and change his age every single year. The system automatically calculates that. If the student is in the system from now until 2045, we'll continue to keep that record updated so that every year when the fiscal year rolls over, we refer back to the birth date and we determine his age at entry for that fiscal year, and we adjust the tables accordingly. You're required to choose gender and sex. This is a mandate from Octave. It is a binary choice. We have no other options here. Unfortunately, that is the requirement at the current time. If that changes in the future, we can make adjustments to it. But right now, you do have to make a binary choice. And it is required. You can't enter the student information without choosing one or the other. Address, you do have to put in an address. In a city. The state is pre-filled. You do have to select a county. And the zip code is required. A primary contact phone is required for this student. This have to be numbers. I can't type in letters. We also suggest that you collect a cell phone number. It may be the same number as the primary contact phone, but we do suggest at this point that you collect a cell phone number. And the reason behind that suggestion is that hopefully by the time this system launches in North Carolina in a few weeks, you will have access to a communication system that is built in that will allow you to text this student or text a group of students so that you can make communication with the student through the system as opposed to having to do it outside. And the system will keep a record of all those communications in case you ever need to go back and look at it, etc. But the cell phone number is important for that reason. You would want to collect the cell phone number. And at that point in time, if the student wants to opt out of a text message, and you can and you can always go back to this screen and edit if you are sending text message to the student telling the classes are closed or they're not meeting any longer, and he doesn't want to receive any more text messages, you can also go back here and opt out at any point in time during the registration. State ID, I believe, again, that's a colleague ID. GED candidate ID, that is if you know the student's candidate ID with GEDTS, because we can do data matching, automatically populate that student's record with past GEDs. Same thing with HiSET. The email address is also important because the communication module that we have in the system will allow you to email the student as well as text. And if they want to opt out of email messaging, they can choose there. Secondary email, we have some of our programs who assign students an email, a program-based email upon registration and entry. So if you are going to assign a student an email, or they have a secondary email address that you want to be able to contact them through, you would put that there. And then we come to the next field is Social Security. And I hope I'm moving slowly enough for you to follow along and enter if you are. But if you need me to slow down or speed up, please just let me know. The Social Security number, there has been a kind of a shift in perception in terms of the Social Security number over the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years. There was a time, especially during the transition from WIA to WIOA, which was around 2015-16, that the Social Security number was seen as not as important. Because a lot of the providers that were getting away from collecting Social Security numbers. We have seen a switch in perception coming from Octane in terms of Social Security number, even to the point that they want us to keep up with the percentage of Social Security numbers that have been collected. So there's a push now to collect the Social Security number whenever possible. So if you have the Social Security number, we encourage you to enter it. That definitely helps in terms of ensuring that you're putting the right student into the system. It will help in terms of data matching. There's a lot of different reasons to collect the Social Security number. If you don't have it or can't get it, however, the system does have a method of allowing you to create one or create a unique identification number by clicking the verbiage below, which says they don't have a Social Security number, to click here. And it will create a system identification number for that student. Please do not edit this number because we need to guarantee that it is unique. And the system generates a unique number based on a number of factors that we have built into the system, so that we can go back and find that student by that number. I am going to add a Social Security number because I can do so. If you're entering a student and you enter a social security number and there is another student in the system that already has a social security number, that same social security number, you will be stopped during this process. You'll get a warning that there's another student that has that social security number in the system. At that point, you will not be able to continue to enter the student unless you change it from a social security number to a unique ID and then work out with the other program where that student may be enrolled to determine which student actually owns that valid social security number, and then we'll have to make edits. So long story short, it will not allow you to have duplicate social security numbers, like it won't allow you to have duplicate identification numbers. Because again, we're looking for one student, one record. Next process is ethnicity. You choose an ethnicity and you're also required to choose a race. Now, once you hit continue, the student is put into the system and you're beginning to build at the top a student snapshot box. As you go through this workflow, the snapshot box will continue to populate with additional information. So once you have completed that first page of information, we call that, I'm going to show my age at this point, we call that phone book information. I mentioned phone book to to my daughters the other day, and they're like, what is that? It's in my phone, right? I'm like, no, not a phone, never mind. It's a book that you used to get when they would come and deliver it to your house. You would get a list of all the phone numbers that were in your city or county. This is basically phone book information. It's the name, it's the address. Some of the information we had to add to that first page, like social security number and ethnicity, in order to meet the qualifications of Federal Table 2A. 2A is a list of students who have indicated an interest in your program, but for reasons, whatever reason, they either did not meet the requirements for a period of participation, which we will talk about later today in the last session, or they never followed up and enrolled in the system. So Table 2A collects a list of those students who essentially showed an interest but didn't follow through. And that data is available in ADVANSYS and you'll be able to see it. But once you've completed that first page of information, you have reached the qualifications for this person, for Mr. Fring, to appear on Table 2A. But we're going to continue with Mr. Fring. We're going to put him into the system. Our enrollment process is separated into three basic sections. There is enrollment system, which puts the student into your program. So the first thing we're going to do is enroll the student into this. Then we're what types of interaction we're going with the student, and those are called registration types. And once we've enrolled and registered, then we will place the student in classes. So the process it's a three-step: enroll, register, and place. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to enroll the student in the program. We have to choose an enrollment date. The enrollment date can be up until the 15th of July. You can go all the way back to the previous July 1st. Once the 15th of July comes, you can go back to that July 1st, because that's your rollover period at the end of the fiscal year. So the general idea is, as long as the fiscal year is active, you can put the student in all the way back to the beginning of the fiscal year. So in this case, that's what we're going to do. We're going to put Mr. Fring, so we'll have some options to work with him all the way back to July 1st. That is his enrollment date. His enrollment date is typically considered to be his first date of contact with the program. It doesn't necessarily mean the first day that he's placed into a class. It doesn't necessarily mean the first day that he's assessed, but it is his first date of contact with the program. And if you choose today's date or enrollment date, that enrollment date establishes the first date of any data entry for that student as well. So if you choose today's date, you will not be able to enter a test last month. You won't be able to enter him into a class last month. You won't be able to enter attendance for him for last month. So pay particular attention to the enrollment date, because the enrollment date establishes the first date of data entry that is possible for this student. I'm going to submit. And it comes back and it shows me that the student has been enrolled in my program here on this date, and he's not separated. If I have made a mistake, this is the place to go and edit it. If I look at this and go, oh gosh, I put him in as today, I need to make it. He actually came into the program on January 1st. I need to go back and edit that. This is where you can edit that right here. Use the edit button there. Our data is correct. I'm going to go to the next step in the workflow process. The next step is the program type. Program type, this is the type of interaction we're going to have with the student. If this student is an NRS student and you want him to be reported on the federal tables, you have to have NRS registration. There are other options here, and I'll show you those in just a second, but you have to have an NRS registration. So I'm going to select NRS registration. Then I'm going to select the registration date. The registration date is the date that he's beginning services within your program, which would include the first date of a test, the first date of attendance, first date of intake, whatever your definition of that is. But again, this is another line of demarcation for data entry. So again, you don't want to choose today. You want to make this the day that the student began working with your program. You cannot go back beyond the original enrollment date. So if your enrollment date was January 1st, you cannot put a registration date of December 31st. So I'm going to put 07/01/2021 again, because I want to be able to work with a student for the entire year. And then at this point, I have to choose a contact type. Contact type is ABE or ESL. This primarily determines what type of assessment will be available to this student as they interact with the program. So if you choose ABE ASC, you'll have table 11 and 12, for instance. If you choose ESL, table 11 and 12 will not be available. So you choose the type of contact that the student is going to have with your program. Then you add that program type. You use the blue button here to add the program type. And once you do that, it begins to add a vast amount of additional information to the student snapshot box. A moment ago, we only had the name and a few numbers, and now we have the entire box of information, because we've chosen him to be enrolled in our program as an NRS student. But we also know that Mr. Fring is an IEL student, IETP student. So if I go to the program types, before I leave this section of the workflow, I can add him as an IETP. Choose here. I can choose the date for that, which would be, again, I'll choose 7/1/2021. I can add the program type. I also know that Mr. Fring is IEL and CE. IEL and CE. Also choose the registration date here and add the program type. In program type, you can also add the other options that are available for you are adult high school and co-enrollment and college program. I'm not going to add either one of those, but you could at this point if you wanted to. And as you look down, every time you add a program type, it is added here. The following program types have been chosen. This is all part of the workflow. Right now, you're working with the types of interactions you're going to have with the student. You've enrolled them in the program. This is the registration process. So you're registering the student in your program as an NRS student who is an IETP student and also IEL and CE. There may be occasions where your program does not show IEL and CE as an option. If your program does not show IEL and CE as an option in the registration process, you do need to contact your state team, because your program has to be designated in the system as being able to provide that service. So if you contact your state team, they can add that to your program if you're supposed to have it. So all of you may not see IEL and CE, and if you don't, that would be why. So you've chosen all the different types of interactions and registrations for this student. I'm going to mash continue now. And now I've gone in and got the registration process completed, and I'm going to now begin to enter additional demographic data that comes from Octane and also comes from state requirements. There is a last elementary school that is required. Last date attended is required. Country of last school, it's a US or non-US are your options here. Education level, it goes from no school completed all the way to bachelor's degree. And it includes grade 12. It includes all the different grades: high school diploma, high school equivalency, some college. I'm gonna choose at random. I'm gonna choose grade 9 for Mr. Fring, and then I'm going to choose employment status, which is currently employed. As you enter data, anywhere that data has a drop down in this demographic form, if you hover over the entry box, you'll get the specific definition from Octave, which comes from their personal identification record, something, this PIRL, that will tell you exactly what constitutes the requirements for that particular data field. Employed is extremely long. I'm not going to read a lot of it to you, but it basically says if the participant A did any work at all as a paid employee, B did any work at all, etc. That's why you would choose employed. So you can cover over those to get additional information if you have any confusion or questions about how that data field should be completed. Driver's license number, if you notice, it's not marked in red with an asterisk, so it's not required. You could put that information in if you wanted to. The next section in this process is special programs. These are, most of these are pre-filled for you, and you would make changes to them only if they're required. So if, in this case, correctional facility, community correction, and other institutional are marked no. Displaced homemaker is marked no, and again, you can hover over the no, and it will tell you what the displaced homemaker field exactly means and whether or not it should be completed. You can read that for yourself to determine how that should be completed. Long-term unemployed, cultural barriers, and again, hover over that. It says if the participant perceives him or herself as possessing attitudes, beliefs, customs, or practices that influence a way of thinking, acting, or working that serves as a hindrance to employment. So that's pre-filled as no, but you can change that if you want to. I'm only going to change the ones that that have please select, just for time's sake. I'm going to choose no to migrant seasonal farm worker. As you for these living in a rural or urban area, I'm going to choose urban. Disabilities is the next section. English language learner. Those are all already pre-filled. You would make changes to those as required. And then the last section is family literacy, workplace literacy, dislocated worker, and distance learner. You can choose yes or no. None of those are required. Those are all pre-filled as a no. Once I submit that data, I continue to fill out more information in his profile. Now the status bar beneath the student's profile is a status bar. This status bar shows you where you are in the workflow process. If the tab is colored red, that means it's completed. If it is green, that means, this is almost Michael Scott in the Office version, but green means go and do it. So if there's a green, if the tabs are green, that means that has not yet been completed. So we completed the demographics, and now we're going to make sure that it says the NRS registration is not completed, and that's because we wanted to give you one more opportunity to review the information and make sure that it's correct. So what we look at here, this is talking about only the student's NRS registration. He's in as an ABE-ASE student. The registration date is 7/1. He's not separated. He's currently active. He hasn't had any attendance hours yet. And this is where you would go. And if you've made a mistake with a date, if you made a mistake that the student should have been ESL, you can actually go and delete this registration and go back and redo the information to make it correct. So this is basically a checkpoint for you just to review it. Shouldn't take but just a second to click through it, take a quick look at it. You're all good to go. You can click through it. Goes back to the page. Now our NRS registration process is complete. We do have an intake form here. This basically says the date of birth and their decision to allow their data to be released and is protected FERPA, but you can release the FERPA related data is marked. You update the status and continue, and that's going to take you to the next step in the process. Next step in the process, you have now enrolled the student, you have registered the student. If you if you notice that the top registration does not show as complete, and I'll explain that in just a minute. I know there are probably already questions about why this registration is not showing as complete, but I will explain that once we get through the workflow process itself. Again, this is designed as a workflow process so that you can see where you are in the process and then come back to the student and complete the information as you need to. So let's say that you worked on the student and it is now lunchtime. It is time for you to go and get something to eat. You want to leave this and you want to come back to it later. When you come back and pull up this person, you look them up by their social security, or look them up by their last name or by their preferred name. You'll come back to this exact same spot and it will show you that class placement still needs to be done. Assessment testing still needs to be done, and secondary goals, if any, need to be entered. So the system is designed to give you the workflow, but not require you to go through all of it at the same time. So you can come back to it at any point in time and pick up exactly where you left off. In this case, we're going to look at the students' class placement now. Registered, enrolled and registered, and now we're doing class placements. Your classes will show for your program in a list here underneath the student profile page. You can search for specific classes. You can hide classes in the future. We're going to leave it just like it is. And if those of you who are in the class creation section that we just had prior to this one, you can see at this point, I suggested strongly that you put a specific name that identifies that class so that you can go and make the proper choices for the student. If you have 100 classes in your system and all of them are named BSP 2000, it's going to be very difficult for you to go, okay, well, it's actually this one, and this one. There needs to be some type of, and again, this is not actually student creation, but this is more class creation. There does need to be some type of identifying information, whether it's a section number, a course ID, something you can use to identify this particular class so that you know that you're putting the student into the right class. So we're going to choose, and if you look at the number of students enrolled, class ESL level 6 has 1 student and has a maximum capacity of 999. This has 4 of 999, but we're going to put this student into test class 5 and test class 4. Those are the 2 test classes that we created earlier today in our sessions. And I'm going to give the student a class placement date of 1. Okay, so what I do at this point is a very simple process. I have chosen the 2 classes in which I want to place the student. I have set the placement date for the student, and I'm going to update the class placement and continue. Continue means I'm going right on through the workflow process to finish the student's registration in the system. And now when I go back to the student's profile page, I now see 2 classes in which the student has been placed. These are the 2 that I selected. The next step in the process is assessments. And as you go through the workflow, as you complete this status bar, it automatically takes you to the next step in the process. So you don't have to go back to the student and think, okay, what do I need to do next? I've got them in the classes. Oh, it's assessments. It automatically takes you there, so that it is a workflow process that is built into the system to help you navigate through the pieces that need to be completed in order to make the student active in the system. So the first thing we're going to do now, we're going to add a pretest. We do still have on the left-hand side, because this is a development environment, we do still have the ability to mark a student as unable to test. This was a COVID response, and you were able to mark students as unable to test. That is not going to be an option going forward. More than likely, we're kind of waiting to see on that. But marking unable to test is typically not going to be an option, but it is still available here if you wanted to practice with it, in case we ever have to go that route again. I'm going to add a pretest though. If you look at the top of the box that comes up when you choose add a pretest, it says assessment testing is based on the contact type ABE-ASC. You have placed the student into your system, into your program, as a student in your system as an ABE-ASC student. That means that my drop downs are limited. I can choose GAIN, I can choose CASAS, I can choose TABE 11 and 12. Those are the only approved assessments currently in the system for ABE-ASC students. I'm going to choose TABE 11 and 12. When I select TABE 11 and 12, the test name drop-down will be filled with the available tests in TABE 11 and 12, which is TABE 11 and 12 Math, TABE 11 and 12 Reading, TABE 11 and 12 Language. If I had chosen GAIN instead, then my test names available would be GAIN English or GAIN Math. If I had chosen CASAS, then I would have reading goals and math goals. So they'll be the only two options in the test name. I'm going to choose TABE 11 and 12, and I'm going to choose a TABE 11 Math. Then I have the option to choose the level. Then I have the option to choose the score. And if you notice, there's a score range that's at the bottom. So if I choose a 302, that is not a valid score, and it's going to warn me that the score is not valid. Choose a test date. My test date cannot be prior to my date of registration. So in this case, it wouldn't be anyway because I chose 7/1/2001. It can't be prior to my date of registration. It also cannot be in the future. You cannot enter assessment results for a day that has not happened yet. Maybe one day we'll invent the DeLorean and we can actually go in the future and do that. But at this point, you can only choose up to today. But I'm going to choose 1/1/2022. You have a couple of other options. If the test was administered virtually, you can click there, so you'll have that information on record. And this test is no longer being tested. That is used for situations where a student comes in and you give him all three pretests. He takes the reading, the math, and the language. And his math is at level 1 and his reading is at level 1, but his language is at level 5. You don't want to continue working with the language test at this point. You would just mark it as not being tested. It doesn't preclude you from entering another language test at some point in the future, but we will remove that test from reports that are related to what tests the students need to take in order to gain a measurable skills gain, or in order to meet the requirements for testing it over for the hours between tests. We're going to leave both of those alone. I'm going to hit save test here, and I'm going to quickly add another. I'm going to add the TABE 11 reading. I'm just quickly go through that again. And now I have two tests in the student record. I'm going to stop there just for time's sake. If you look at the student's testing record, you're still in the testing page. You could add an additional pretest. You can also see that the student is required to make a measurable skills gain by achieving a 449 on the math or a 536 on the reading. And that would move the student from level 2 to level 3, from level 1 to level 2, or from level 3 to level 4. You scroll down further, you can see that the student tests are put into the system, and the test is marked in green because this test is the test that will be used to establish the entering EFL for the student. And the entering EFL, as we'll talk about in the POPs presentation this afternoon at 2 or 3, I believe, is where the student is slotted on the federal tables. So we mark it in green, so it's easily viewable when you look at the student to see where the student is placed in the system. Also, there are a couple of options on the right-hand side. There is an edit option here to edit the test and its score. There's also a delete option if you made a mistake. to it until the test is approved in the system. And we're going to talk about approvals again later as well. You can edit the test, you can delete it, and re-enter. There is an approved box on the left-hand side. When that X changes to a check mark, that test is locked in the student record and at that point cannot be edited. It also shows you who entered the test, when they entered it, and what type of test it is. All that information is there. It also shows you the test was entered by a manual entry. We also have test data, test import, so there, you can see how the test was brought into the system. I'm not going to belabor that point because we do have a session on assessments later, but I'm going to click continue here. And again, we're in the workflow and we get to secondary goals. It's the only thing that's left. Secondary goals is not required, so we don't make it part of the workflow because it's just something you can choose to do if you want to. I'm going to choose to do that. I'm going to go open the secondary goals by clicking on the green tab where it says secondary. I'm going to add improve basic skills and lead public assistance. Once all that is done, I can submit for approval. And now I have built my student snapshot box that shows a great deal of information about the student. It shows they've enrolled in the provider, that they've contact type for ABE-ASC. I can continue to enter test scores here. It shows that they're also, in addition to their NRS registration, they're also IETP and IEL and CE. They don't have an outcome yet. I can scroll further down and I can see additional information about the student record. I can see that this enrollment is in my provider. They have an NRS registration, they have an IETP registration, they have an IEL and CE registration. I can scroll further down and look at their period of participation, which we'll have another session on periods of participation later today as well. It shows me the fiscal year. It shows me whether or not the students met 12 hours. All this information across the board will apply to this particular period of participation. And as the student works through the system and has more periods of participation over multiple years, you'll see multiple records there. I can scroll down further and see personal information. This is a collapsible field. If I need to make a change to this information, I can click and edit here. If you notice, the Social Security number is X'd out. You do not have the ability to view Social Security numbers once they're edited, and that is a state requirement. But you can also see additional information. If I needed to go and add his, change his address or add his candidate ID, I'll click edit here to do so. I can scroll down further. I can see the demographic information that was entered. I can see a student portfolio allows you to add additional documents to the student record. You can even add a student photo if you wish. If a student has certifications that are applicable, you can add those here. If they have transcript information from another school that you want to add to their records, you can add it as a document. There's a number of other documents you can add, and that's up to your discretion. One-on-one tutor sessions applies to CBOs, really not to you, so we'll skip that. Class placement history, you can expand that by choosing maximize. It shows you the classes in which the student has been placed. Assessment test reporting, you can maximize that. It shows you the assessments that have been placed on the student record. And then ACT, SAT scores and case notes. Case notes you can add to the student record. It's just a text field basically that's stored on the student record. I'm rushing just a little bit because I want to get to one more piece. You've entered the new student into the system, but the question always at this point is, why do they not show an entering EFL and why do they not show registration complete? That's because in order for this student to be committed to the record and for the day that you've entered for the student to be committable and reportable on the federal reports, this information does have to be approved. Approvals are designed for the person who is responsible, and we have a section on approvals later today, but the approvals are designed for the person who is responsible for submitting the data to the state to review and approve or decline this data so that they know that the data they're responsible for is submitted correctly. So under approvals, you see there's an NRS registration. There are test scores that are pending. So I'm going to go in and I'm going to approve real quickly. And again, we'll go over this in the approval section later, but I'm going to approve his NRS registration. and I'm going to approve his test scores. And in the approvals management section, we will talk about what happens if you decline and those type things. But right now, I'm primarily concerned with getting these approved so I can show you the changes to his record. When you go into approve the assessments, just like it was on the student record, it will show in green assessments that you have chosen will set the entering EFL for the fiscal year. In this case, entering EFL will be ABE level 1. So I'm going to approve those. Once the data is approved, now when I go back and look at Mr. Fring's record, and other people are entering the same. Okay, now when I go and enter this student's record, and this is an example of what happens if you enter the same student twice. We had somebody that has entered another person with the same name, but I can look at the date of birth and go, okay, he's registered in my program. This is my student here, so I'm going to click on his name here. And now I see that he's enrolled in the provider. His registration is complete. His entering EFL has been established. Does he have a measurable skills gain in the fiscal? No, not yet, because we haven't given him any post-test, so he's not post-tested. His period of participation doesn't have 12 hours because we haven't added any hours to his record, but I can still see the same information about that student. If I looked him up as from another program, I would not see all this information. I see a limited amount of information as determined by state policy in terms of what I'm allowed to see and what I'm not allowed to see before I enroll him in my program. Couple other things. If I wanted to add him to different classes or remove him from classes, the change and add classes option is available there. That is for actually working with existing students. I could print a course schedule for the student by clicking on course schedule, and the classes to which the student has been assigned will show up here. I can make that a PDF and just hand it to the student and go, okay, these are the 2 classes you're supposed to be in. They start this day. There's your teacher's name. This is the schedule for when those classes meet. That's the basic gist of entering a new student. We didn't really have a chance to go over working with students who are in other programs. I've got about 3 minutes. I'm going to try to show you that really, really quickly. I'm going to go to student management. I'm going to look up new students and add new, and I'm going to choose. So when I looked up my student a moment ago, I found another student in other programs. So I am going to choose this student who is not in my program, even though he has the same name. I'm going to choose this student who's not in my program, and I'm going to view his profile. And because he's not in my program, I can only see limited information. I can see his POP record. I can see some of the information here. If I wanted to enroll him in my program and make him part of the Tecumseh program for which I am the program administrator, I noticed that his workflow timeline here is still all in green. That means he's not in my program. I need to add information. And all I have to do to put him into my program is choose edit here. Then I see the list of programs that he's been placed in there. I can put him in my program. I'm not going to because I don't want to have 2 students with the same name for later purposes. But I would choose just the same thing that we did before. I choose an enrollment date in my program. I choose the types of registrations. Once I do that, which the types of registration and interactions the student will have in my program. And as I build that record on this student right now, I see an enrollment in Piedmont College, enrollment in Blue Ridge College. If I put the student into my program, there would be a third box here that would say Tecumseh Adult Education with my types of registration listed and the dates in which the student's has been placed. This will become particularly important when you're working with students who've worked with other programs in the past, because you'll see their entire history. You'll know how long the student was in Blue Ridge. You'll be able to see just small amounts of information about that student as you go through before you place that student in your program. and we'll talk about this in the POPs presentation, which is later on this afternoon. But we'll talk about how to end a period of participation when a student works in multiple programs, and what happens to when they leave one program but they remain in another. I'm out of time. There's a lot of things that I would